Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan arrived in Australia chasing their dreams, but what they got instead was a nightmare that would shock the world. Varun Joshi, Mira Khanna, Kabir Nair, Tanya Reddy, and Ishan Malik stepped off the plane at Sydney Airport, their eyes wide with excitement and nervous anticipation. For months, they had been preparing for this moment, saving money, applying for scholarships, and convincing their families that this journey would change their lives forever. The Australian sun shone brightly as they wheeled their luggage across the tarmac, unaware that the country they had dreamed of arriving in would soon become the setting for events that would shatter their lives. The students were full of ambition and hope. Varun Joshi, the natural leader of the group, envisioned a future filled with academic achievements and opportunities that would set him apart from his peers back home. Mira Khanna, quiet and observant, carried a notebook everywhere, documenting her thoughts and impressions of everything she saw. Kabir Nair, always glued to his laptop, dreamed of creating something revolutionary in the tech world, believing that a scholarship in Australia could launch his career. Tanya Reddy, loyal and dependable, was determined to support her friends while balancing her own academic goals. Ishan Malik, charming and clever, often joked about shortcuts to success, though no one yet knew the extent of his willingness to bend the rules. As they settled into a small, shared apartment in a quiet suburban street, the group explored the neighborhood, enjoying the sunny weather, tree-lined roads, and the distant hum of city life. Cafes, convenience stores, and parks became their immediate world, each step filled with the excitement of independence and new experiences. They laughed about trivial things, shared meals, and planned their classes, unaware that the bonds forming among them would soon be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The dreams that brought them to Australia were real, but so was the shadow of risk lurking quietly in the background, waiting for the right moment to surface. After settling into their new lives, Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan quickly realized that living in Australia was far more challenging than they had imagined. Beyond the rigorous academic schedules and cultural adjustments, there was a constant pressure to maintain appearances, both to their families back home and among their peers. It was during these long nights of study and shared frustration that they discovered an online forum connecting Indian students across the country. What started as a simple way to exchange notes and tips for exams soon evolved into discussions that were far more secretive. The forum became their hidden world, a place where ideas flowed freely and boundaries seemed to disappear. Kabir often posted about ways to make extra money using his tech skills, while Ishan joked about bypassing rules and testing limits. Varun, driven by ambition, tried to focus on practical advice, but the excitement of the group's risky conversations gradually drew him in. Tanya and Mira, though more cautious, were curious about the discussions, often reading silently and weighing the possibilities. The line between harmless experimentation and criminal activity became blurred, and the students began to explore options they would have never considered before arriving in Australia. What made the forum even more dangerous was its anonymity. Behind usernames and avatars, the students shared strategies for obtaining electronics, managing finances, and even avoiding detection. Advice that seemed innocent at first, like reselling items or finding loopholes, slowly escalated to far more serious schemes. Each post, each shared tip, deepened their involvement and strengthened the sense of trust among the group. They felt invincible in their little digital bubble, unaware that every action they discussed online left traces that investigators would later follow. The forum, meant to be a support network, had quietly become a blueprint for their downfall, setting the stage for a chain of events that none of them could have imagined. Local authorities in Sydney began noticing patterns that initially seemed ordinary but grew increasingly suspicious over time. Several suburban apartments rented by international students, including those of Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan, appeared repeatedly in reports involving missing electronics and other high-value items. Laptops, smartphones, and gaming consoles were turning up in pawn shops and online resale sites at a rate that could no longer be ignored. Investigators started piecing together seemingly unrelated incidents, realizing that a larger network might be operating quietly within the student community. Police began conducting discreet surveillance around certain apartment complexes and student neighborhoods. Officers noted late-night comings and goings, frequent visits from unfamiliar individuals, and the rapid turnover of expensive gadgets. The behavior was subtle yet distinct enough to suggest organized activity rather than random thefts. While local residents remained oblivious, the authorities saw a growing web of connections forming across multiple suburbs, all centered around the same group of international students. What shocked investigators the most was the sophistication of the operations. It wasn't a matter of petty theft or careless handling of valuables. These were carefully orchestrated schemes designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk. The students appeared to know exactly where to sell items, how to launder small amounts of money, and even which digital trails to erase. It became clear that someone with technical knowledge and organizational skills was leading the efforts, guiding the others with precision. As the investigation intensified, detectives documented every detail meticulously, preparing to build a case that would reveal the full extent of the network. The suburban streets that once seemed quiet and safe were now linked to a growing criminal operation, and the students, caught in a cycle of ambition and temptation, were unknowingly stepping closer to disaster. Each stolen item, each calculated move, brought them further into a trap from which there might be no escape. One rainy evening, the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood where Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan lived were suddenly disrupted by flashing police lights. Detective Simon Hayes led a carefully planned raid on the apartment complex, moving swiftly through the corridors with officers at his side. The students were caught completely off guard, their ordinary routines shattered in an instant. The sound of sirens and shouted commands filled the air as police entered their rooms, leaving no space for denial or excuses. Inside the apartments, the authorities found a trove of evidence that stunned even the most experienced officers. Laptops were opened, revealing encrypted folders full of financial data and suspicious communications. Smartphones contained transaction histories and messages that directly linked the students to stolen electronics and fraudulent schemes. Fake IDs, forged bank statements, and even small credit card skimming devices were scattered across the rooms, leaving no doubt about the severity of the crimes. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of careful planning and deliberate deception. The students were handcuffed and led out of their apartments, their dreams of academic success and a better life dissolving in the cold rain. Neighbors peered through windows in shock, unable to comprehend how a group of young, seemingly ordinary students could be involved in such serious criminal activity. Media coverage began almost immediately, sensationalizing the arrests and spreading the story across Australia. The raid marked the first public revelation of the network that had been operating under the radar. For the students, the arrest not only exposed the individual students but also raised questions about the larger system that allowed such operations to flourish unnoticed, setting the stage for an international investigation that would uncover even more shocking truths. As the investigation progressed, Detective Simon Hayes and his team realized that the operations extended far beyond the suburbs of Sydney. Evidence uncovered during the raid suggested that the network was not confined to Australia. There were clear links to India, indicating a coordinated international scheme. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, and shipping records revealed that stolen electronics, personal information, and even small sums of money were being funneled overseas. The scale of the operation was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The authorities discovered that the students were only a small part of a much larger network orchestrated by a shadowy figure known as Arvind Rao. He had positioned himself safely overseas, directing the students remotely, giving instructions on what items to acquire, how to launder money, and where to send digital data. Every step the students took was carefully guided, and every seemingly small decision carried a bigger purpose within the network. Investigators were stunned by the level of sophistication. It was no longer just a group of young students making poor choices, it was a well-organized international fraud operation. Cooperation between Australian and Indian law enforcement became essential. Teams from both countries worked tirelessly, sharing intelligence, tracking financial trails, and attempting to intercept shipments before they reached their final destinations. Each breakthrough revealed more complexity, multiple shell accounts, temporary phone numbers, and encrypted communications designed to avoid detection. For the students, the revelation was devastating. What they had initially believed to be harmless shortcuts and minor schemes had placed them in the middle of a criminal operation with far-reaching consequences. The realization that they were being manipulated by a mastermind they could not see added a layer of fear and helplessness. The investigation now had to untangle not only the actions of the students but also the true force behind the entire operation, setting the stage for further shocking revelations. Tensions within the group of students began to rise as the investigation intensified. Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan, who had once shared laughter and dreams of success, started to feel the weight of suspicion and fear. The strain of secrecy and the looming threat of arrest created cracks in their relationships. Ishan Malik, always the clever and opportunistic member of the group, quietly made a decision that would change everything. Unbeknownst to the others, Ishan had been in contact with Detective Simon Hayes, providing crucial information about the group's activities. He detailed the methods they used to acquire electronics, the way they communicated online, and even the identities of their contacts. What had once been camaraderie turned into a web of betrayal, as Ishan realized that cooperating with the authorities might be his only chance to avoid severe consequences. The knowledge that one of their own had turned against them shocked Varun and the others when the arrests began to follow the information Ishan had supplied. The betrayal had far-reaching effects. Friends who had trusted each other implicitly now looked over their shoulders, unsure who could be trusted. Paranoia and fear replaced the sense of unity that had once defined the group. Every conversation, every online interaction, and even casual gestures became suspect. The bonds they had formed through shared ambition and risk were rapidly disintegrating under the pressure of law enforcement scrutiny. For Detective Hayes, Ishan's cooperation was invaluable. It allowed the authorities to map out the full extent of the operation, identify key pieces of evidence, and plan further arrests with precision. The betrayal, though devastating for the students, became the turning point in the investigation. What had begun as minor suspicion escalated into a full-scale dismantling of the network, leaving the students to face not only legal consequences but the personal heartbreak of shattered trust and loyalty. The trial of Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan quickly became a media sensation, capturing attention both in Australia and back in India. Families flew in from New Delhi, Mumbai, and other cities, desperate to understand how their children, once bright and ambitious, had ended up entangled in such serious criminal activity. Courtrooms overflowed with journalists, cameras, and onlookers, all eager to witness the unraveling of a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. Inside the courtroom, evidence piled up, revealing the full extent of the students' involvement. Digital messages, financial records, and testimonies showed that some students had been actively participating in thefts and fraudulent schemes, while others had followed instructions without fully understanding the consequences. Each piece of evidence painted a complex picture, a mix of naivety, ambition, and manipulation. The defense argued that certain students, like Mira and Tanya, had been coerced or influenced by more dominant members, highlighting the uneven power dynamics within the group. Meanwhile, prosecution lawyers presented a meticulously detailed narrative, showing that despite their youth, the students had knowingly engaged in serious criminal behavior. Public reaction was intense. Communities debated responsibility, morality, and the pressures faced by international students adjusting to life in a foreign country. Families of the students faced not only legal battles but the humiliation of their children's names appearing in news headlines. The trial also raised questions about the systems in place to monitor and support students, sparking discussions about safety, guidance, and oversight. For the students themselves, the courtroom was a place of reckoning. Dreams of degrees and careers were replaced by anxiety and shame. The trial forced them to confront the choices they had made and the consequences they could no longer avoid. It was a tense, emotionally charged period, and every witness, piece of evidence, and revelation added layers of shock and suspense, leaving everyone watching to wonder how the story would ultimately conclude. As the trial progressed and investigators dug deeper, a shocking revelation came to light: the mastermind behind the entire operation was not among the students who had been arrested. All along, the real orchestrator had been operating from the shadows, carefully directing Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan without ever setting foot in Australia. Arvind Rao, a skilled and elusive figure based overseas, had designed the network with precision, knowing exactly how to manipulate inexperienced students into carrying out the illegal activities. The discovery sent shockwaves through both the courtroom and the investigation team. Everything the authorities had uncovered about the students' crimes now had to be seen in a new context. They were participants, yes, but also pawns in a much larger and more sinister scheme. Detective Simon Hayes and his colleagues had to adjust their strategy, realizing that dismantling the students' part of the network was only the beginning. They needed to trace Arvind's digital footprint, intercept communications, and coordinate with international agencies to uncover the full scope of the operation. For the students, the revelation was a mixture of relief and terror. On one hand, they realized that the extent of their own culpability was smaller than initially believed. They had been manipulated by someone far more experienced. On the other hand, the fact that the true criminal remained free and capable of continuing the operation added a new layer of fear and uncertainty. The investigation intensified as authorities tried to identify Arvind's exact location and methods. Every lead was followed, every digital trace analyzed, but the mastermind proved to be exceptionally careful, using multiple layers of encryption and proxies to cover his tracks. The students' lives had already been upended, and now they faced the haunting knowledge that the person who had set them on this path was still out there, controlling events from afar, unseen and untouchable. ChatGPT said. The consequences of the investigation and arrests were devastating for Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan. Their once promising futures were now in ruins, and the lives they had worked so hard to build in Australia were abruptly dismantled. Deportation orders meant returning to India under the shadow of criminal charges, a journey fraught with shame and uncertainty. Families, who had once been proud of their children's achievements, now faced public scrutiny and embarrassment, struggling to reconcile the students' ambitions with the choices that had led them into legal trouble. For the students, guilt and fear became constant companions. Varun, who had once led the group with determination, now carried the weight of responsibility for decisions that had gone terribly wrong. Mira and Tanya, who had hoped to follow a path of academic success, were left questioning every choice they had made and whether they had been manipulated into wrongdoing. Kabir, with his dreams of technological innovation, realized that his talents had been misused in ways that could forever tarnish his career. Even Ishan, whose betrayal had been pivotal in aiding the investigation, could not escape the sense of shame and fear that now haunted him. Beyond personal consequences, the arrests sent shockwaves through the wider community of international students in Australia. Universities and student housing complexes became more cautious, and authorities introduced stricter checks and support programs to prevent similar incidents. The suburban streets that had once seemed safe were now associated with scandal and cautionary tales. The emotional toll was immense. Friendships had been broken, trust destroyed, and dreams abruptly halted. For all involved, the experience was a harsh lesson in the dangers of ambition unchecked by caution. It was a stark reminder that a single misstep, even when motivated by hope or opportunity, could spiral into a life-altering catastrophe, leaving scars that extended far beyond legal consequences. The story of Varun, Mira, Kabir, Tanya, and Ishan became more than just a sensational news headline. It evolved into a cautionary tale for students around the world. Ambition and opportunity, when mixed with poor decisions and outside manipulation, had the power to destroy lives in ways none of them could have predicted. Authorities emphasized that the lure of quick money and shortcuts, no matter how tempting, carried consequences far greater than most young people realized. Australian law enforcement, universities, and student organizations took steps to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Stricter checks on student finances, more rigorous monitoring of rented apartments, and improved support networks for international students were introduced. Orientation programs began to include warnings about online scams, fraud, and peer pressure, ensuring that newcomers understood the risks as well as the opportunities. The case highlighted the importance of guidance and vigilance, showing that even ambitious, intelligent students could fall prey to schemes if left unprepared. For the students themselves, life after the trial was a difficult journey. Deportation brought not only legal consequences but also personal reckoning. Families struggled to rebuild trust and reconcile the reality of their children's choices. The students faced social stigma, public scrutiny, and the challenge of rebuilding their futures with lessons learned the hardest way possible. Even as they moved forward, the shadow of the events in Australia lingered, a constant reminder of the fragility of dreams when mixed with risk and deception. Ultimately, the story served as a stark warning: ambition alone is not enough, and the pursuit of success without caution can lead to devastating outcomes. What began as a journey full of hope and promise ended in regret and upheaval, leaving a lasting lesson that continues to resonate. The shocking case remains a chilling example of how quickly opportunity can turn into disaster, and how even the brightest minds can be led astray when manipulated by forces beyond their control.